Book of Life, a show about Jewish books, music, film, and web. I'm Heidi Estrin. The Book of Life is a podcast service of the Feldman Library at Congregation B'nai Israel in Boca Raton, Florida. Additional support comes from the Association of Jewish Libraries. The Book of Life's Canadian correspondent, Anne Dublin, sent in this interview with Canadian picture book author Lesley Simpson, whose newest book is called A Song for My Sister. Thanks, Anne, and thanks, Lesley.
Lesley Simpson is a wonderful writer of books for young children. She's the 2012 winner of the Canadian Jewish Book Award for her picture book, Yuvi's Candy Tree. I caught up with Lesley in early September, just before her presentation at the Ashkenaz Festival in Toronto. So Lesley, welcome to the Book of Life podcast. I'd like you to tell our listeners a little bit about yourself.
Okay, I grew up in Hamilton, which is a small town west of Toronto, and I live in Toronto now. I've been writing since I was a kid, since I had a diary as a little girl, and I'm delighted to have a new book out.
Well, we are too, and we'll get to that in just a little while. Lesley, when you were a kid, what kind of books did you like to read?
The book that I fell in love with passionately was Harriet the Spy, to the extent that I used to pretend I was a spy, and I used to hide behind my parents' couch in the living room conducting surveillance. I am not kidding. And I totally remember when I was in grade 4, I thought teachers were aliens. I had a notebook in my pocket where I was conducting my surveillance, of course, and I wrote down everything that my grade 4 teacher brought into the classroom. And she was a teacher that was teaching us macrame, like how to make little pot holders and owls out of string and beads. And so I'd write down string, beads, and then she started bringing things in like frying pans, and I noticed, she had very pedestrian items like nylons. And I thought, well, how could an alien have all of these ordinary objects? And I remember on Halloween, my best friend and I went to her house to trick or treat because I was still conducting my surveillance. And I love that experience of being so immersed in the story. And I think I loved Harriet the Spy because I've always loved watching people, and Harriet was a spy, and so I could be a spy too. And I got in the habit of carrying this little notebook around. And then, when I worked as a reporter for Canadian daily newspapers, I'm still walking around with a notebook, right? So I think that had a big impact on me.
I think most writers have that spy in them. I mean, they have to, because they're curious about people and about events. And sometimes those special things spark a book.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's true. It doesn't sound very noble, but the truth of the matter was I went into journalism because I thought it was an amazing way for someone to pay for my own education, to pay me to be curious. And I still feel that way about working as a writer.
So, Lesley, your books are mainly for young children. They're mainly picture books. Why did you start writing for this particular age group?
I love the form. In journalism, there's a saying that it takes a long time to write short. And a picture book is sometimes only 500, 600 words. It's kind of like a little opera, It's got a lot of drama in it, and I've always loved the form. I love small things in the world, and to me, the picture book is a very powerful small thing. I've written, in my other writing life, I've done academic work, and I've worked as a journalist, and I've done longer form grown-up writing, but there's something about the picture book form that can immerse you in an entire universe in a very short period of time. I like the economy of it, and I like the beauty of it. If if you're fortunate to have a good artist, then to me it's just a kind of beautiful merger.
Indeed. So your latest picture book is A Song for My Sister. It's published by Random House. I've just had a chance to look at it, and I find it delightful and charming, humorous, and quite touching. Tell us about where that came from.
I had read something online about naming ceremonies for girls. And the truth of the matter is, with this book started out as another book. I wrote a book called A Name for My Brother. It had a lot of toilet humor in it, a lot of burps and farts, and I showed it to a publisher, and they said, we love the idea of a book celebrating the idea of naming, but parents are going to freak out with the toilet humor. Would you consider rewriting it? And to me, writing is always rewriting. So I said, sure. I didn't know what would come out, but out popped A Song for My Sister. So it's a completely different book. But to me, one of the most powerful parts of writing is what I call the loot bag factor, which is that you don't always know what you're going to get. The surprise is an incredible part of the experience. And when the story started moving in that direction, I read something online about a recent kind of reclamation of this ritual for girls. And I love the idea of celebrating a new life in a meaningful way. And I wanted to do it with some spunk and some humor. And it kind of emerged organically. I only found out later that, purely by accident, that it's the only English language picture book that celebrates girls getting a name in the Jewish world. Now, we're in 2012. I found that. I was a bit flabbergasted, but I'm happy to start filling the void.
And I think all the Jewish librarians out there are very happy too. And I wish our listeners could actually see the book. I hope you buy it for your libraries, for your children, your grandchildren, because the illustrations make it special in its own way. This is the story of a young girl. How old is she, Lesley? About 7? And she's been wishing for a baby sister for a long time. But the baby that she gets just keeps crying and crying and saying, "Wah!" And you've got to see these big, huge, gigantic letters on each page. So the illustrations and the text complement each other beautifully. Lesley, would you like to just read a page or two from the book? Maybe, I don't know, the beginning?
Sure, I would really like it. So this is A Song for My Sister. I made a wish when I was 3. I shook my piggy bank over a wishing well. Swish, clink, clank, the coins tumbled down. What did you wish? Mum asked. Secret, I whispered. My wish took 4 years to come true. A sister. Who knew someone so teeny could make so much noise? Maybe she's hungry, said Mum. Maybe she wants to dance, said Dad. Maybe that's the only sound she knows how to make, I said. Oh, cutie pie, they cooed. What's her name, I asked. We'll announce it on her 8th day, said Dad. That'll be her Simchat Bat, her welcome to the world. Do you have a name for her? Mum asked.
That's great, Lesley. Thanks. So let's talk about your writing. Let's talk firstly about your apprenticeship as a writer. When you were learning to write, when you were starting out on this very difficult writing career, is there anything you wish you had done differently when you look back on the beginnings?
I would say absolutely. I had a kind of bizarre experience because I wrote and illustrated a book in high school that was published. It's called The Hug, Canadian bestseller, Anik Press. I did everything wrong. I did all the things you were not supposed to do. I called up Anik I had my little magic marker drawings. I had worked in grade 13 almost a year on imagining what a hug would look like and actually drawing it. And I'm not an artist by training, but I am very visual, and I had an image in my head. It just took me a long time to get it onto the paper. And so I called them up, and they remembered me because when I was 11, I wrote an article called What to Do When You Run Out of Flashlight Batteries and You Can't Get to Sleep, because I was a big insomniac as a kid. And this was an article that was published in a book called Word Sandwich. It was really cool. It was a collection of articles and book and stories and poems by kids, chosen by kids, published by what Annick Press used to be, the previous company name. So they remembered my name from this article. And it was like stuff like put on pimple cream if you need it, and mess up your room and talk to your plants and all these things you could do to try to get to sleep. And so I had this bizarre experience where I was in high school. I knocked on the door. They loved the book. The book got published. I had no clue about the rejection rate for manuscripts. I was living in a dream world, but I didn't know it at the time. So if I could go back, I would tell my younger self that I was extremely lucky to have had that experience, but that was not the norm. So there was a period in my life where I just stopped writing. I thought, I guess I just have one book in me. I guess that's all I have. And that was really because I didn't know. I was clueless about the rejection rate. So I'm glad that I'm back on the horse, so to speak. And it was just from an ignorance of the reality of the business, you know. And I think that writing is rewriting, and sometimes it's a bit of an archaeological dig. So you have to sometimes write 5 really bad stories before you get to the good one, and you have to keep digging.
Well, you're absolutely right about the rejection rate. I mean, if I showed you all my rejection letters, I think I could wallpaper my study for sure.
Some stories deserve to be rejected, and they're not good enough. And that's just the reality of the business. And that's the only thing that I wish I had known earlier on.
So tell us about your writing community. Do you have a critique group, a writing group? Where do you get your support?
You know, when I worked for, I used to work for a daily newspaper, and I did an assignment one day, which was my own idea for purely self-interested reasons. I wanted to hang out with Bob Munch for a day to see how he actually test drove his material. And I hung out with him. I went to Guelph, and we went together to a preschool where he basically test drove some stories. And he told me, now he's highly entertaining. This is a guy that has sold more books than the Bible. He's at the top of his game, and he's phenomenally animated in person. He's on fire. And he did a few of these stories for the preschool. And when we came out of the building, he said to me, well, like, those 2 will never be a book. And I said, how do you know that? He said, because there's not enough there. There's not enough material there. I could tell they weren't. He's watching the kids' body language, right? If they're not interested, they'll be rolling on the floor and picking their nose pretty quickly. And if they are interested, then you grab them. So I thought it's a fantastic way to test material. I do have a writing group. It's a small group, and we all work in different forms. I'm the only kids book writer in it, but the women that are in the group are really good editors. But then what I did this year with some new material is I went out to a kindergarten class and I actually gave it a test drive. And that's a terrifying experience because if they don't like it, you're going to know right away. If you're an adult and you go to a poetry reading and you can't stand it, you are still polite. You might be writing a grocery list secretly, but you're polite. Whereas with a kid, there's no lying. You're gonna know right away. And I read them a song for my sister with all the crazy laughs, and they were killing themselves laughing. And I gotta say, that is like the best sound in the world because it's so honest. But that's what I've started to do recently, to test drive and to see, I might think something's funny and it might not get a laugh, or I may think something is a bit pedestrian and they may be killing themselves So it's a really good barometer. And I think Bob Munch really knows what he's doing, so I kind of took a page from him.
I think especially for this age group, because they're very honest. Lesley, what do you think is the hardest thing about writing?
I think the ideas are the easy part. The execution is more difficult. Picture book, the difficulty is it takes a long time to write short, and you have to have multiple layers operating within the story. And I think it's just as a form, that's the hardest part to get it right. A picture book is not an anecdote. It has to have more substance to it. There has to be a kind of subtext that's underlying it. And that's a lot to pack into a small package. I think for a picture book, I think that's the hardest thing. Recently, I have another friend who's a really accomplished picture book writer in Canada, Frida Wyszynski, and I showed her a manuscript I was working on, and she saw right away what was wrong with it. She was absolutely right. Sometimes you need somebody else to do the diagnostics for you.
Yeah.
What's not working here?
Yeah.
And that's always helpful. So there's always a way to deal with the difficulty, but you have to be kind of open to criticism, I think, and open to someone who's a real veteran having a look at it.
Lesley, what is the best advice you've ever received as a writer?
The thing that comes to mind for me is there's a writer named Anne Lamont who wrote a book called Bird by Bird. And in one of her chapters, she has a chapter called The Shitty First Draft. And it's all about sometimes you have to write the bad draft in order to get to something better. And I really believe that to be true. And I think that when you ask what's the hardest part, sometimes the hardest part can be when you're writing something that you know is, quite frankly, a piece of dreck. But you have to believe in the process that you're going to get somewhere better. And the thing is, you can't get somewhere better sometimes until you get out of the mud. And being in the mud isn't really that fun. So it's having the faith to believe you're going to get out of it. Get out of that muddy swamp and enter some, beautiful sunlit ocean at some point. And when you get into that and what I call the loot bag and the surprise, and you feel energy coming from the story, then it's super fun.
So, last question. If you're willing, would you like to tell us about your next project?
I have a new picture book that I'm working on, but it's embryonic right now, so I think I'm going to have to keep you in a state of suspense, if that's okay.
Sure.
Until it's on more stable footing. I'm very excited about it. It's very funny, but I'm going to have to keep you in a state of suspense.
All right. Well, we'll look forward to it when it comes out. Lesley Simpson, thank you for sharing so much about your writing life, about your latest wonderful picture book, A Song for My Sister. For more information about Lesley Simpson and her books, you can go to her website. The address is www.lesliesimpson.ca. This is Anne Dublin signing off in Toronto.
There are so many ways to connect with the Book of Life. Fan us at facebook.com/Book of Life Podcast. Follow us at twitter.com/Book of Life Pod. Email us at bookoflifepodcast@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail at 561-206-2473. You can also listen to the latest episode by phone at 916-313-3820. And of course, find links to everything at bookoflifepodcast.com. The Book of Life is a podcast service of the Feldman Library at Congregation B'nai Israel in Boca Raton, Florida at cbiboca.org and is supported in part by the Association of Jewish Libraries at jewishlibraries.org. Our background music is provided by the Freilach Makers Klezmer String Band at freilachmakers.com. Thanks for listening and happy reading.